and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick, with the City of Hampton's Communications and Marketing Department. And today we're going to talk to a man who I will say needs no introduction, but we'll give him a little bit. Jim Oliver has been City Manager of Norfolk, City Manager of Hampton, County Administrator in James City County, and has a wonderful perspective on Hampton Roads as a whole. Welcome, Jim. How are you?
I'm good, Robin. Thanks for having me.
And see, we'll start talking about regionalism by saying thank you for coming through the tunnel to get here. It is one of the impediments, I will say.
It will. It was a challenge every day when I was a city manager in Hampton. It's kind of a paradox. It's what unites us and what causes us challenges. And it's a nice kind of a symbol of the challenges that we do face as a region. As you probably know, there's a lot of data on how extensively we work and play and live all over the place in Hampton Roads. We often work in a different city than we have our home. And so on the one hand, we de facto our region. On the other hand, we're very much focused on our hometown and the emotional attachments that go with that. So the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel is a big symbol of something, and we all try to process it into our psyche about, whether it is a big project or whether it's our local road. So
your career, you started actually in media.
I did.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, in college, I worked for a newspaper that happened to own a TV station. It was in South Bend. And when I came out of college, I was a journalist, and I worked for Channel 3 in Norfolk, which was owned in those days by Landmark Communications. And I basically covered all of the Hampton Roads for actually a year and a half. I was the Peninsula correspondent, actually lived in Hampton, covered City Hall back in the days of Mr. C.E. Johnson was city manager. He was quite a person. He, Ann Kilgore was the mayor, and his pet project was to build a Coliseum. Nobody in Virginia had built a Coliseum. And wow. I remember going to the Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club, and hearing Mr. Johnson present this idea, and obviously Hampton did that. So I went from kind of the Peninsula correspondent to being the General Assembly cover, and then eventually I went with the city of Norfolk and founded a public information program, which actually we were proud of because it was the first one in Virginia. And then I slid into being a city manager. I became an assistant under Bob House, who was a kind of a regional city manager also, and then went to James City County in 1976. Came back to Norfolk in 1986 and was the manager there for about 12 years. Actually, I also was the 3-year manager in the city of Portsmouth.
Oh, see, I forgot that. Okay.
And so on the one hand, I've actually had a lot of nice experiences throughout Hampton Roads, and really enjoy this. It's home. I remember you mentioned the Bridge Tunnel. It opened, I think it was in '57. And I started in college in '56, and I started in college in '60. And when you showed up at the toll booth at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, it was $1.25.
That must have been a lot then.
Right, and
wow,
and
that's comparable to what Portsmouth is having to pay.
Exactly, and it was an additional 20 cents for every passenger, and there were about 8 or 10 of us that would take a car and pack it to go to college. And when we would hit the tunnel, we all shell out 25 cents or something like that. But it's interesting, where we came from and then kind of where we are today. Tolls were how we built Hampton Roads. I mean, the James River Bridge had it, the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. There were 2 tunnels built to connect Norfolk and Portsmouth, the Virginia Beach Expressway.
I remember that toll. That was still around.
And in a funny way, I guess it's a great kind of evolution of our society. When a lot of the Great Society stuff came along and everything, people worked hard politically to get the tunnels put into the interstate system. which let the toll go away. And then when we ran out of money as a state in our recent times, we don't have a funding model to really keep up the transportation that this region needs. I mean, this region is built on water, and in order to cross water, it's more expensive than it is to cross land. And so it's a part of being in Hampton Roads.
And you have that paradox in which people want it. They want better transportation. They want roads and bridges and tunnels. But they don't want to fund it with tolls. They don't want to fund it with state taxes. And I'm sure you faced this in your entire career. All the things citizens want and think somehow there's money to pay for already out there. Don't take any more out of my pocket.
There's no question. And that's a very powerful background, emotional background. It's like that baby song that people used to sing, I want what I want when I want it. I mean, that's a pretty dominant American attitude. And you couple that with kind of the Jeffersonian kind of anti-government piece, you really get a lot of stress and strain in trying to work public issues. And the times have changed so much in how you make decisions, and we've democratized a lot of things, and yet we've had a hard time kind of figuring out how do you make those decisions in ways that people's values get coupled together, kind of with what the decision is that they're trying to make, and transportation is a huge one for Hampton Roads.
Well, when you talk about regionalism, and you've written about it before, you recently wrote a piece, an op-ed piece, what does regionalism mean to you anyway?
Well, I think the definition that works for me is it's kind of governance as opposed to government. And for me, governance is the sum total of how we combine our public, our private, our nonprofit, our community into getting things done, how society gets things done, period. And sometimes we make this piece of it government and this piece of it nonprofit and so forth. But it's the totality of how do you get things done, and so to me it's where people are most comfortable at trying to get things done, and that's changed a lot. There's a lot of data today that as the world has changed, as we've gotten into what they call the global economy, that region, the geographic area, the area that people go from work to home to play, and there's a tremendous amount of data on that, on Hampton Roads, where how many people come out of James City every day to work in Hampton? How many people in Hampton go to Virginia Beach to work? I mean, those are some really strong numbers that basically say our living pattern is very regional. Well, but on the other hand, people really don't want a government to be regional. They say it's too big, it's too awkward, and so forth. But there's a lot of data that is saying the most progressive way to live in today's global world is through metropolitan dynamics. Whether that is a lot of words get used, but one of the words that's used a lot now is networking. How can you not just cross the Newport News-Hampton political line, but how can the businesses of Newport News and Hampton work? How can the people of Newport News and Hampton work to make decisions that are in their both best interests? And that's a big challenge. But again, I think the reality is we live as much in a regional setting as we do in our own Phoebus or downtown Hampton or where we might call our home. And it's also very interesting because America doesn't make all the rules anymore. We used to make a lot of rules. We were pretty much self-sufficient. Our competition today is more Hampton Roads versus Singapore than it is, Newport News versus Virginia Beach. And, we get that kind of in our head, but emotionally, we don't know what how do you work that out? And then you lay on the Virginia systems, Virginia's public policy systems. We are the only state of 50 that have the so-called independent city, independent county dynamic.
Very confusing.
Incredibly confusing, which in Virginia, no matter if you're James City, you do it all. You do what in other states cities do, and you do what counties do. If you're in the city of Hampton, you do county things as well as city things. Okay, well that does a couple of things. It tends to balkanize us. It tends to put independence next to independence next to independence, whereas in most states, say North Carolina, if you live in Charlotte, you also live in Mecklenburg County. And counties have typically been health, education, welfare, services that pretty much get better provided on a larger scale. Cities have typically been fire, police, public works, water. At smaller scale. I mean, most people want their school systems and so forth to be reachable, touchable. Well, in Virginia, we locked up on that a long time ago, and there's a lot of history about why that happened. Then on top of independent city, we have something called Dillon Rule. Dillon Rule was a Iowa court case in the 1800s that basically said if a legislature had not delegated specifically a power to a city, it didn't have it.
They don't have the power.
The presumption is negative. Well, what kind of world is that? I mean, you got Hampton, which is a very complicated business center that has a police department, a fire department, a public works department, and yet you're supposed to go to Richmond to get permission to do stuff. It's really kind of a crazy thought. I mean, most of us say we want to be empowered. We want to be in Hampton able to make our own decisions. Virginia doesn't allow that. They give you a charter. We got 40 different charters in Virginia for cities. City of Norfolk has to go to Richmond to change the calendar of when the city council can meet.
Oh, right.
So again, the Virginia structure on top of the real world dynamics of we're living and working in different places is very paralyzing. We do not have an elected official that represents Hampton Roads. We have elected officials that represent Newport News or Hampton or maybe Hampton and York County. A little bit of split, but there's no elected official that represents Hampton Roads. So there's nobody in the political process to go to get stuff done in Richmond. So you have this confederation. You know, we as a nation, we started out with the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
And we decided within a few years that didn't work. We're still trying to make it work in Virginia in local government. And so you throw on the mayors the kind of the paradoxical responsibility that somehow they're supposed to be looking out primarily for their city, but they're also supposed to look out for the region. But as everybody knows, small is better in the citizen's mind, so they really don't give much power to a mayor to think big. And so again, it all confounds kind of living in 2014.
So how do we get past that? And there is this juggling. I mean, even and there was. You go back to who built the first convention center, and Hampton Roads can only hold so many. Who gets the campus for the community college? Who gets the airport? You know, how do you get past that as an elected official or as a staff? You know, the top staff. What is best for my locality and what is best for the region as a whole?
Well, you mentioned you'd read a recent op-ed, and the way I suggested we might go about that is I really think Virginia needs to look at its governance. And I suggested that the governor, new governor, and the General Assembly could consider convening the presidents of our public universities and ask them to be a commission that brings their resources to a table. They're supposed to be our highest learning centers. They're funded by taxpayers, so they have the same need to connect to taxpayers, which there have been some fairly celebrated cases lately where they are estranged from the public, just
Right.
like sometimes cities are estranged. And it seems to me, if they could put that together to look at governance, and then I would argue that they bring their talented professors and their IT systems, and then do a lot of engagement, to bring people onto campuses to talk about what they would like the different levels of government, the private sector, to really do. What should the Virginia system look like in the new world? And I'm convinced if there was enough process and enough trust built across all the boundaries.
And that's a hard one.
It's a huge.
We'll
huge
talk
one.
about engagement and trust a little bit later.
Yeah. So to me, it would be to try to start from the top and the bottom and put together a process to just look at it and see if there's something out there that's a lot better and more modern than what we have.
So you truly think it will take a structural change in our government
Absolutely.
systems
I
in
do.
order to accomplish this, because the hurdles right now are just too big.
And look at Virginia, how it struggles to try to balance what southwestern Virginia and central Virginia and northern Virginia and Hampton Roads is all about. And what we do is we just dumb down to common denominators that aren't really very accurate, because the lifestyles and the priorities of parts of Virginia are so different. Okay, so people on the one hand say very quickly they don't want regional government. On the other hand, the default is we have state government trying to run the whole
true.
state.
Trying to portion that. The road money, for example, is one of the hot button issues, because the studies have shown that the rural areas get much more road money per road mile per person than the more urban areas.
No question. And when you couple that with what I think is an outmoded style of General Assembly members, there are 140 of them, they go up to Richmond for either 30 days or 60 days, and they're going to make all the decisions. I mean, these cities and counties are 24/7 operations. And then the idea that you're going to go to headquarters to once a year to get permission is just...
And there's a pretty big disconnect, I sense, right now between the local governments and the state government. I know Hampton in its budget uses the term local aid to the state, and the school system talks a lot about mandated programs that are unfunded. And so I think that tension is also part of the problem, determining whose responsibility. But how long will this take, Jim? Let's look into the crystal ball and say, can we even do it? Is there a political will to change things? And how long a term process do you think this is?
Well, for the purposes of that proposal, I suggested that the commission would take 2 years to really bring the best analytics and thinking from the campuses, but then a lot of engagement, a lot of public engagement, where people really are both brought a lot of information. I mean, our civic illiteracy is enormous. I mean, people can't name the name of the mayor. They can't name the name of the governor. And we've walked away from civic education in America as well as in Virginia. And so, how can you be smart about this? So I think 2 years of study and engagement, and then the last 2 years the governor would try to implement it with the General Assembly. So we'd have a good process that would try to coincide with the governor's term. I think the little bit I know about the new governor is he's trying to be bipartisan in setting up his cabinets and so forth. So it seems to me this issue could be very timely if he and the General Assembly would consider it. I'm sure there are other ways to think about it, but that to me is one that takes the tax-paying institutions of Virginia, brings them to the table. I think is as much a need for the colleges and universities of Virginia to reconnect to their citizens as it is for city governments and state government to reconnect. So I think if it was all kind of put together, there might be a lot of good serendipity that would come out of that.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you
Sure.
very much. It's been a great chat, and we're going to come back and talk to you some more later about another topic. So thank you, Jim. You have a wealth of information.
Well, thank you.
And thank you for watching. I hope you've learned a little bit more about what regionalism is or can be and what some of the challenges that we face are. Thank you for watching.